What's up, everyone? Janitor Jake here. Now see, one of my favorite movie actors of all time is good old Tommy Hanks. Now a lot of you might be familiar with Thomas in movies such as Forrest Gump, The Da Vinci Code, Castaway, and stuff like that. However, I'm more of a fan of all of his goofy ha-ha comedy movies like The Burbs, The Money Pit, and even really random stuff that no one ever mentions like Volunteers. And speaking of liking stuff, since I'm already going off on a tangent here, I'm also a pretty big fan of the fantasy, role-playing, adventure kind of stuff. I grew up playing video games like Dragon Warrior and Legacy of the Wizard on the old Nintendo Entertainment System, and I grew up watching movies like Hawk the Slayer and Dragon Slayer. Now I did try to dabble with Dungeons and Dragons a tiny little smidge. However, living in the middle of the woods in northwest Wisconsin, there really was not a plethora of people to play that with. So most of my experience was watching the VHS tape of Dragon Strike and playing with the little characters and the maps. So you can only imagine my excitement when one day I'm walking through our local shopping center, Pamida, and I start digging around the $5 movie bin. And all of a sudden, I see it in glorious VHS fashion. There it was, Mazes and Monsters. How could this be, I thought? One of my favorite movie actors of all time starring in what looked like a fantasy role-playing adventure kind of a film? I mean, I couldn't believe it. How amazing is this? Well, let me show you.
Whatever may happen, where the road may bend, always remember we are our special friends together whenever our lives may take us away.
So as it turns out, the movie does not take place in some Lord of the Rings fantasy era. Instead, it takes place in the present day, which then would have been sometime in the 1980s, possibly 1983, but I will get to that later. So to really fully understand what this movie is about, we're pretty much going to go through it step by step. So the movie Mazes and Monsters is actually based off the novel Mazes and Monsters, written by Rona Jaffes, which is actually based on a true story, kinda, and I'll get into that in a little bit here. So the movie kicks off with a bunch of firemen and police officers and ambulances and reporters, and you're like, holy smoke, what's going on here? Well, they're just looking for some Grant University student who went missing, and it might be from playing Mazes and Monsters. Who knows?
We heard a game of mazes and monsters got a little out of hand over at the university. Seconds, bud.
So then we cut to 6 months earlier where the movie finally gets going. The first person we're introduced to is J.J. Brockway. Now J.J. is a 16-year-old with an IQ of 190, has a talking bird named Merlin, and he also likes to wear funny, different, goofy hats. And he lives with his overbearing mother in some fancy pants downtown New York apartment. And of course, she's all prissy, high class, and goes to parties and what have you. She's overly happy all the time and always talking about her life, and even changes up JJ's bedroom every time he leaves, which royally ticks him off.
It looks like a hospital!
Even though he tries to look and act happy, he definitely seems depressed.
Poor JJ.
We then cut to Kate, who, like JJ, seems kind of high class, but high class in a different way. She's hanging out with her mom, having an intellectual conversation about her daddy issues and how she's so intelligent and smart that dudes don't want to date her, and that she's going to be a famous writer one day, and so on. Like I said, she gives off the high-class vibe, but more like an artist who wants to be left alone to finish their project. After that, we're introduced to Daniel, who, once again, like everyone else, is a fancy pants. While sitting at dinner with his parents, they start running off at the mouth about how he should go to MIT for all the computer stuff that he's into, instead of Grant University, where he's just going to goof off with all his gaming stuff. And honestly, I kind of agree with his parents. They have nothing against him making games and stuff. They just want him to get a decent education so he can learn the ins and outs of programming and what have you, which honestly would actually help even more with programming games. But he's just not having any of that. Well, then we find out that all three of them are actually like best friends and they play mazes and monsters together all the time. However, they have one problem. They need a fourth player.
We've got to find a fourth player.
Right.
Well, then we're finally introduced to the main dude himself, Robbie Wheeling. And of course, because why not, once again, Robbie's parents got a lot of scratch, just like everyone else. However, they give off a vibe of being very strict and stern entrepreneurs or something. His pops is really mean and strict, acting like he's better than everyone else, and meanwhile his mother's just a raging alcoholic, and the two of those are fighting and arguing and about ready to come to blows right there in the car.
I drink to get through the day.
Anyway, Robbie's transferring schools because at his old school he could not concentrate and get any work done and was always messing up, all because of some game, which we learn later was Mazes and Monsters. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Anyway, once he gets dropped off, his father gets all mushy and shakes his hand and tells him to actually call collect if he needs to.
Call us collect if you need anything.
Anywho, JJ sticks an advertisement on the wall looking for a fourth player, but this player needs to specifically be able to play at level 9 and won't flake out or freak out. And guess who just happens to see the poster? So JJ starts harassing Robbie and asks him to play, which Robbie actually denies, but then JJ pulls out the big guns and invites Robbie to a birthday party for Bridget Bardot. Now that's one of the problems with movies like this, is that they can really date themselves. And how random. I mean, really? Bridget Bardot? I mean, I get it because she was a big sex symbol in movies, but those movies were from the 1950s and 60s. And she would have been like 50 at this birthday party, so I don't understand why they went with her instead of somebody else that was a lot younger who was also popular during the early 1980s. It doesn't even matter anyway, because JJ never invited her to the party to begin with. So Robbie shows up to this packed room with like absolutely everybody from the entire campus, because apparently JJ is just that popular. Anyway, Robbie gives JJ a bottle of wine from
1987, great year.
1987? Now remember earlier when I said something about this movie taking place sometime during the 1980s, but I wasn't quite sure? Well, it's poo-poo garbage like this that makes things confusing. The movie itself premiered in late December of 1982, but in one of the scenes they drive by a movie theater which shows The Empire Strikes Back, which came out in 1980. Okay, so maybe the film takes place in 1980? But then there are random signs in the dorm that show 1982, and in Kate's room, she has a calendar that says 1983. Okay, so fine, let's say the movie is taking place in 1983. So why in the smack does he have a bottle of wine from 1987? Unless that's the joke? Unless that's the joke. It's such a crappy bottle of wine that they misprinted the label, or the wine is actually from 1887. And because it's so old, JJ didn't properly read the year. Anyway, Robbie meets Kate and decides to instantly fall in love with her and tell her she's beautiful.
You're very beautiful.
Well, then he makes mention of Mazes and Monsters, so of course she gets all excited, but then really loses her mind when he says that he just so happens to be at level 9.
Oh.
Isn't it wonderful to be finally creating your own scenarios?
Yeah.
So the whole crew get together and they use peer pressure to try and convince him to play. And after saying no, over and over, which they could care less about, he finally gives in. And the only reason why is because Kate's gonna be there. Oh, okay,
You're gonna be there, I guess I'll have to give it a shot. All right.
So finally, we get to see some geeky tabletop gaming. They go around and introduce their characters with all this nerdy jargon like Galacia the fighter who has the mighty talking sword of Lothia, and Freelook the fanatic of Glossamere who is the cleverest of all sprites. And then we get to Robbie's character who is Pardieu, the holy man, who has the graven eye of Timur.
The greatest of which is the graven eye of Timur.
And then from there, we get a montage shot. We get to see Robbie and Kate flirt, and then play the game, and then more flirting, and playing, and playing, and flirting, and so on and so forth. Well, one night while hanging out, Robbie starts telling Kate about his older brother named Hall, who ended up running away during his own birthday party and was never heard from again.
You're kidding.
So Robbie keeps having these nightmares every once in a while about trying to get Hall to come back and stuff. And the entire Hall thing will tie into the story here in a little bit. So one day, JJ and Daniel are being all nerdy and painting their mazes and monsters figures and talking about how terrible life is. JJ says he wants to be an actor, but apparently he's so butt ugly that no one will hire him. And then poor Daniel, bless his little heart, is having the complete opposite effect. He is so handsome and sexy that women just think he's bad news right off the bat and don't want to be in a relationship with him because they think he's a player. So he just goes around banging random strangers almost every night.
I wouldn't mind just having a girlfriend.
Gay!
Well, then JJ gets all ticked off even more because they haven't played Mazes and Monsters for like 3 days. So eventually they find a day that works for them, but they need to make sure that it's okay with Kate and Robbie. So JJ goes to ask Kate, but Robbie answers the door, which confuses JJ beyond belief. So apparently this entire relationship between Kate and Robbie has been, number one, a big giant secret, or number two, everyone is so stupid that they cannot see that Kate and Robbie are doing the hanky-panky. But of course they can't play that day, so they ask about doing it on Wednesday, which of course makes JJ upset again.
Well, take it easy, all right?
And now here is where things really seem to take a dark turn. All of a sudden JJ wants to straight up off himself, and he wants to do it in a quote-unquote cool way so he's remembered forever. So he decides to do all that in the forbidden Pequod Caverns, which is a cavern system where people have gotten lost and have never been found again, so it's not open to the public. However, once he gets there, he sees how awesome looking it is and gets an idea. So check this out. During the next campaign, Daniel, who is the maze controller, says there is a pit with what looks like there could be treasure inside, or it could be a trap. So JJ, deciding to be sneaky and deceitful, just decided to jump into the pit to get the treasure. But as it turns out, it was a trap, and now his character Freelick is dead. And he planned it so perfectly that the only person who would be able to bring Freelick back from the dead, being Pardue the Holy Man, does not have enough points at that moment to be able to raise the dead. And now everyone's all mad and upset because the game won't be the same without his character. And it pretty much ruins the entire game for everyone. And now JJ has the opportunity to do what he wants to do. So he proposes they do a new game in a real setting. Good old Pequod Caverns. And after some discussion, they all agree that it would be a good idea, but it needs to be kept absolutely secret.
Aye.
And then JJ goes and blabs to some medical student so he can just borrow a skeleton. So anyway, they go and quote-unquote borrow costumes from the art department and head out to the caverns. At one point during the game, they all decide to split up while looking for an herb. So JJ, who is the maze controller now, must be doing some kind of magic, because he goes to a little secret hiding spot where no one can find him, and yet his voice can be heard perfectly fine throughout the entire cave system.
JJ! JJ! JJ!
Your maze controller is with you, unseen to your eyes. Now, let the journey begin.
Almost like he's using a PA system or something. Anyway, JJ rolls the dice and now there's a monster attack. All of a sudden, when Robbie hears this, he completely flips a biscuit and starts to freak out. And suddenly, there is an actual monster there. And because of all his hooting and hollering, everyone comes running out to see what the heck is going on. And there's Robbie standing there talking about how he slayed the stupid thing. But when they look down, there's nothing there. Oh man. Oh man. So now everyone is all happy and excited and talking about how great everything is and how amazing Robbie was and so on. But then when JJ mentions something about trying to make monsters out of paper mache and stuff, Kate interrupts him and decides to get serious while the camera pans into her.
The most frightening monsters are the ones that exist in our minds.
Now you know we're in for some serious business. So now they're back and everything seems fine, except for one thing. Robbie keeps talking and acting like Pardue.
Knock it off, Pardue.
And here's where things get a little confusing to me, because now he's a mix of both Robbie and Pardue. For example, as Pardue, he should not recognize Kate and JJ as Kate and JJ, but instead as Glacia and Freelik. However, he still recognizes things that only Robbie would know, like the Twin Towers in New York, and he still goes to class, and he still knows Kate and JJ and Daniel. But yet, he's going around acting like Pardue and blessing people and stuff. Now you could say, well, you know, he is still Robbie, but his personality has changed to that of Pardue. However, his goofy hind end is still going out and interacting with things as Pardue. Like I said, even as Pardue, he still recognizes things that Robbie would know, like things in the city and people and going to school and stuff. But then at one point he ends up in these tunnels under New York, and the goof suddenly thinks he's in a maze. And the subway train above him is a dragon guarding a treasure? What are you talking about, you big idiot? Now remember earlier when I said that he was having dreams about his brother Hall? Well, now his brother Hall is actually interacting with him in his actual dreams. The Great Hall, which he is referred to now, is standing at the end of a sewer pipe and tells Pardue things he needs to do in order to finally meet him, like going to a city underground, going to the Two Towers, and being celibate, which means no knocking boots with anyone. Anyway, to make the long story short, too late! He needs to be more holy and celibate, so he breaks up with Kate so she cannot ride the baloney pony anymore. Then the next day, Kate and Daniel hang out and they decide that they want to bang each other. Robbie, aka Pardue, goes on an adventure without telling anyone and is now considered missing, and everyone is freaking out about it, and they go and hire a detective and cause a big giant stink. So the three of them use their mazes and monster skills and track him down at the Twin Towers, where they play cat and mouse with Robbie, aka Pardue, going up and down and up and left and right and left. Eventually they catch him trying to fly off the building and tell him it's just a game, where he starts bawling like a little baby.
JJ, what am I doing here?
Then they get all mushy with him and everything is fine. Well, 3 months go by now and everyone's lives are perfect. Daniel is going to be a president of computer engineering, and Kate's going to be a famous writer, and JJ is going to be a famous actor, and so on and so forth. Well, they go to visit Robbie to see how he's doing, but unfortunately he has fully turned into Pardue. He thinks his parents are innkeepers, and he doesn't know JJ and Kate anymore, only Freelik and Glacia. So because they all feel bad for basically causing him to be like this by peer pressuring him to play in the first place, they decide the best thing to do is play one more time.
And so, we played the game again, for one last time. We saw nothing but the death of hope and the loss of our friend.
The death of hope and loss of a friend. Wow. Wow, that ending got really dark and actually kind of ticks me off because honestly, I like happy endings. Now, as far as the movie itself goes, not gonna lie, I actually kind of like it. Now granted, I watched it quite a bit as a kid, and you could say I'm looking at it through the eyes of nostalgia. But I think the main reason why I really liked it so much was because of the character development. You really get to know and feel for these characters. JJ with his goofy hats, talking bird, and overbearing mother who constantly redecorates his room whenever he's gone. Kate, who wants to be a famous writer but has writer's block, can't date dudes because she's apparently too smart for them. And of course, she's got daddy issues. Daniel, who wants to be a computer game designer and is apparently so attractive he cannot get a girlfriend, so he just hooks up with strangers almost every single night. And then Robbie, who has a super strict father, alcoholic mother, and an unhealthy obsession with his brother Hall. You have to approach this movie for what it is, a reality drama and not a fantasy adventure. Now, is this the greatest movie ever made? Obviously not. The acting can get pretty cheesy, the music definitely adds an interesting feel to the film, and they promote the thing like some fantasy adventure, but instead it's a made-for-TV after-school drama. Now, I mentioned earlier that the novel and the film are actually based off of a real-life story, kind of, sort of. Well, here's a simple breakdown of that story. In real life, there was a kid named James Dallas Egbert III who was a child prodigy and was accepted into college at 16, and he also played Dungeons and Dragons. One day, he left a suicide note and went into the steam tunnels under the college to kill himself. However, his attempt failed, and he ended up going and hiding out at a friend's house. While he was missing, an investigator found out that he played D&D. So he went out and made up a bunch of nonsense publicly that James went into the tunnels to play D&D and got lost or killed, which all then spiraled out of control, saying that gamers like that are in a cult and they can only join by invitation only, and they go underground and all this hogwash. Eventually, he tried living a normal life for a while and told the police the real story of what happened. But unfortunately, in 1980, he committed suicide. Now, this is really interesting because if the movie is based off of that story, then it should have been JJ the movie was focused on and not Robbie. Like James Dallas Egbert III, JJ is a 16-year-old prodigy who is in college, plays mazes and monsters, and gets bouts of depression, and eventually wants to off himself. But the author, Rona Jaffe, decided, that's not good enough. And stories like this is what triggered the anti-D&D movement throughout the 1980s. And that's what this movie tried to do. It tried to be an anti-D&D, anti-fantasy, role-playing, tabletop adventure gaming kind of stuff. But the funny thing is, the movie almost comes off completely opposite of that for me. The movie should make you dislike the players like JJ, Daniel, and Kate, and make them seem like instigators and bad guys, at the same time making you like and support the police and the parents who are trying to protect their kids from the evils of fantasy tabletop role-playing games. But instead, it's the opposite. You're just watching a group of friends living life like normal and once in a while sitting in a dorm room playing mazes and monsters. And when things do start getting sketchy with Robbie, they do try to save him. Meanwhile, the parents are all strict and overbearing, and the investigator comes off as a complete dinklepuss. Anyway, that was good old Mazes and Monsters for you. Like I said, I kind of like it because number one, I grew up with it, and number two, I know not to expect a fantasy role-playing action-adventure kind of a movie. Instead, it's a goofy, cheesemo, made-for-TV B-movie drama about a bunch of friends trying to play mazes and monsters and enjoy the college life. And you get to see Tom Hanks bawling like a little baby. So anyway, with that being said, I think I'm going to take off and actually go and watch the Blu-ray. Yeah, that's right, they finally came out with it on Blu-ray. See, I actually originally owned the VHS. That's my original copy on VHS. But just recently, like I think September of 2022, they actually released the Blu-ray edition. I would suggest getting this. This is odd. Look at that. You got the dice and you got blood. And then it says swords, poison, spells, battles, maiming, killing. Ooh, a bunch of good stuff. And what's crazy is actually with the Blu-ray, you actually get commentary with this thing. So anyway, I guess with that being said, I'm going to take off. So whatever. I'm Janitor Jake, and I will see you guys next time.
Mazes and Monsters is a far-out game. Swords, poison, spells, battles, maiming, killing.
Hey, it's all imagination.
Is it?